Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
We are in the third chapter of the book of Shemot, Exodus. I believe that we finished the Rashi on verse 18. I think we read it quickly, but we read that last Rashi as he comments on the use of the root kuf resh hey to happen, something to take place in the story of Bilam. I believe that we're about to read verse 19. Let me read verse 18 one more time, even though we've done it over two different shiurim, to see if there are any last comments, because it was a chunky verse, and then we'll go into verse 19. So again, Vishamu lekolecha, God says to Moshe, almost as a prophecy, they will indeed heed your voice. Uvata, you will go. Atav ziknei Yisrael, you and the elders of Israel, and Melech Mitzrayim, to the king of Egypt. V'martem elav, you will say to him, Adonai Elohei ha'ivriim, two yuds, the God who is the God of the Hebrews, Nikra aleinu, happened upon us, manifested itself, God's self to us. V'ata, and now, Nelchana, let us go. Derech shlosh yamim, a journey of 3 days. Bamidbar, into the wilderness, v'nizbecha ladonai Eloheinu, and we will offer sacrifices to Adonai our God. Okay, so that's what we did that verse over the last two classes, and we finished the Rashi. Last comments or thoughts on this? Renee, your hand is up.
I just want to dedicate our learning this morning to my brother's yahrzeit.
Thank you, Renee. And for those who are not at Minyan, do you want to share a sentence about your dear brother of blessed memory?
He was the best. He was the best big brother that any girl could ever ask for. And he was the best uncle that any kids could ask for. And I really miss him a lot.
Yehi zichro baruch. And as you said at Minyan this morning, he certainly would have reveled in all of the joyful things that are happening in your family. And I'm sad for you that you can't share it with him. Thanks. So yes, our Torah study this morning is dedicated to his memory. Joanna.
So I was quite fascinated by our discussion last week over the shoresh kuf resh hey, and then I think it was Rick who pointed out its later usage as kuf resh aleph. And it kind of lingered with me, and I was thinking about it throughout the day. And all of a sudden, a verse from Ruth popped into my head. In Ruth chapter 2, when Ruth lands up in Boaz's field, we're told that by a double usage of the shoresh, vayikar mikraha, the happening just so happened to happen that she ended up there. And Malbim has a fascinating comment on that, because he sees that as like, wink, wink, there's no such thing as coincidence. It's divine providence. And his proof of that is the episode with Abraham's servant when he's sent out to find a wife for Isaac. And he says a prayer to God as he's on his journey, which starts, Hakrena lefanai hayom. And so clearly indicating that happenings are through the work of God. And as I thought about those stories, there are actually lots of parallels. Pick any two of those three stories, ours, Abraham's servant, and Ruth, lots of parallels. But there are a couple of parallels I found in common among all three. The use of the shoresh pakod appears in all three stories. Derech appears in all three stories, some sense of a journey. And again, the comments on Derech and Ruth are fascinating, and I think apply to all three stories, that a physical journey isn't just a physical journey. And all three stories involve interactions with non-Israelites. So I just thought that was like sort of a fascinating connection there around what's going on. And to me, it speaks also to some of the discussion around the intersection between divine providence and human action, because all three of those stories, it's not like people laid back and God just took action. Human action was necessary also.
Wow, Joanna, that is such an enriching comment. Thank you for that research. Thank you for going down that rabbit hole a little bit. And yes, I did not know that comment by the Malbim. but I'm totally taken by that notion that the fact that kara and kara are homonyms, and on some ways they mean the opposite of one another, right? That with the aleph it suggests intentionality and a calling out and a directed revelation, and with a hey, it seems to be the opposite happenstance. It may be one of those biblical polarities that are really kissing cousins, and that they're much closer than we think, and things that we sometimes things that we think are God speaking directly to us are just accidents, and sometimes accidents are happening for a very, very specific reason. So that's a wonderful expansion of our conversation. Thank you, Joanna. Barry, I see your hand.
You're muted.
We don't hear you.
That was very exciting. I'm just thinking now, when Joseph happens upon the stranger who gives him directions to find his brothers, was there a shorish there also?
I mean, there was a word, so I'm sure there was a shoresh. I don't think it's the root. I don't think the root kuf resh hey appears. I think it may be pei gimel ayin. I'm not sure offhand.
Now you brought that up. It's thinking of all the.
Sorry, it was matzah by Yimtze'ehu ish that a man found him. Mem tzadi aleph.
Oh, okay, just happened to find him. Okay,
happened to find. Okay. I just to linger there for one more second. I mean, even in English idiom, like the word happen both means random and as you were saying, Joanna, a wink wink to non-random. Like a happening is actually something significant, right? A happening is not just a happening. It's almost as if the word is playing with its own antonym. When something is a happening, it's the opposite of something happening by random, but we use the word happen to indicate it in English. So it's interesting across cultures and millennia, these ideas are dancing with each other. Larry and Diane?
Yeah, I want to go in a slightly different direction, but a much different direction. I sometimes get lost in where we are. I have to remind myself we're at the burning bush. And this is God telling Moshe what he's supposed to do when he goes into Egypt. And he's basically said to him, and so imagine Moshe's listening, he said, you're going to tell the elders that God manifested himself to us, and now therefore, let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness. And I know we haven't come to the next verse yet, but why isn't Moshe saying, whoa, hold on, Hashem. What do you mean 3 days? I thought we were going for good. And I don't think we talked about this. And I don't see, I haven't looked at all the commentary, but why isn't there commentary on why this is God is letting him in on the plan, which we know is the request as he builds up during the 10 plagues. But it's really a weird thing for God to be saying to Moshe in giving him instructions to the people without saying, and this is part of my plan or something else.
Yeah, I'll yes and you, Larry, because you're right. We're not given the full the full curated script here in terms of what God is communicating to Moshe along the on the side, but we do have God already having said in verse 17 that I'm taking you out of Egypt, and where am I taking you to? El Eretz HaKnani Achiti B'Amari. So there's already an articulation, Moshe, there's our destination. And you're right, there's an implication then in verse 18, but the strategy is going to be what you're going to tell God, Pharaoh, is not that you're going to the land of the Hivites and the Canaanites, but a 3-day journey. And you're right, it doesn't say it explicitly with God saying to Moshe, okay, here's our plan. I think we're supposed to just take that in without explicit question. And you're right, on our page, there's no one asking that particular question. Remember that questions, arguments from silence are endless. Like why didn't something get said or gets asked is a good wondering and also an endless wondering, because there are many more things that are not said that could be than that actually are said. But I do think that verse 17 indicates from God to Moshe what the long-term plan is.
I can accept that.
I accept your acceptance. Okay, but why don't you stay unmuted, Larry or Diane, and read verse 19, and we'll push forward.
Okay, I guess I'm elected. Vani yadati ki lo yiten etchem melech Mitzrayim lehaloch v'lo biyad chazakah. And so this is still God speaking to Moshe.
Yep.
Suppose still telling him what he's supposed to tell the elders, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that he won't give to you, the God Melech Mitzrayim won't give to you, won't give to you to go, won't allow you to go. Semicolon. And then it says, and not with a strong hand, but I think that means lilo, without and not without a strong hand.
Good. So in translating that verse there, you've done a lot of the work that Rashi is going to do with us. We're going to do it with Rashi slower, but you kind of stumbled and resolved in that after stumbling on the two parts of the verse that are challenging, right? One is, what does the root natan mean here? That in case not everyone is getting it, the lo yitain is from the root natan. It's considered a pei nun verb, where the first letter of the root is a nun, and it falls out in certain forms. So this is God will not give. How do you translate give? I like how you did it. You said God will not give to go, meaning permit, right, or allow. So you rendered it literally, and then you gave what seems to be the obvious sense of the word. And then there's velo. So I like how you reread it as lilo. Lilo, if people don't know it, is a less common Hebrew, more poetic way of saying without. What would be indicated here is Pharaoh will not let you go without a strong hand, unless if I offer my strong hand. Because if you don't read it that way, it's hard to make sense of. The king of Egypt will not let you go, and not with a strong hand. You can turn it into English words, but it doesn't mean anything if you do it that way. So let's pause there. And anyone want to comment on either the two things that Larry resolved there in the verse, or anything else that awakens in your mind in the verse? Elon?
So two questions. One is on the word yadati. Why, and my translations has the same thing. Why is it translated in the present as opposed to the past? Wouldn't it be va'ani yodea? Doesn't va'ani yadati mean I knew?
Yeah, good. So it's almost certainly meant to be a present tense concept, and I don't have a great answer for you as to why it's yadati. The answer is basically a repeat of the question, which is, why is it rather common in biblical sentences for there to be a use of a tense of a verb that doesn't seem right from our perspective? And part of that, we discussed this a little bit. I love language. I'm not a trained philologist, so there are someone who has more scholarly training in this can answer it more complex. We take for granted our tenses because we have learned to speak this way, and in the same way that how time obviously exists, but in some ways time does not exist, right? A butterfly doesn't know what time is. So if not every creature is experiencing time, can we say that time is actually somewhat a construct of the human mind, right? Clearly there's a passage of something, but the notion of time is a construct. And if the notion of time is a construct, then the words and syllables we use to convey that time is also a construct. So we just take it for granted that there's such a thing as a past tense, a present tense, and a future tense. And we kind of graft English backwards onto either earlier English or other languages, assuming that in the 13th century BCE in Canaan, not just their language, their conception of what time is was more or less the same as ours. But what if their conception of time was 70% of what our conception of time is? Then the whole notion of how they used words to denote that is even more confounding. which is a long way of saying, you're right, we would translate v'ani yadati as and I knew, or maybe I have known. And we're not 100% sure why that phrase would appear here, except that if you read poetry and if you read Shakespeare and you read even certain writers today, there is a playfulness with tense that thickens the possibilities in a verse. Everett Fox, who's usually very careful about these things, is kind of uncareful here in the sense that he would say back to you, Elon, I don't know why it's yadati. We all know it's a present tense verb. He translates it as but I know. Does anybody have a translation that it all gives possibility to the past tenseness of this verb? Either of your two interesting ones, Larry?
Well, not alter. Alter actually, the only thing he comments on is the ani yadati, which is, he says, and I, on my part, know, which is the emphasis when you repeat the pronoun. But then he says...
which Everett Fox does also. He's very careful about that. When you have an unnecessary pronoun and it's included, he usually adds a comma, but I know that the king of Egypt. Okay?
But Aryeh Kaplan, who I hope Avi Chavivi won't mind my saying this, revealed yesterday in the most interesting Siddur class ever, and I recommend to everybody to go listen to it. It's absolutely fantastic, and it changed my davening this morning, wow. as did your davening and Rabbi Chorny. It was the best davening ever.
Wow!
I commend people to come to either Zoom or come to the shul. In any case, Rabbi Chavivi revealed that Aryeh Kaplan is one of his theological mentors, and that is well worth listening to. But here's what Aryeh Kaplan translates it as. I know in advance that the Egyptian king will not allow you to leave. And I have a theory about that, which I don't see his commentary. Is it possible that the va on the before the ani actually serves as a vav hapuch? So I will know. I know in advance, as opposed to yadati, I knew.
I saw that Vera just joined, so I'm going to yield to her in a second. I'm not aware in what's called classic grammar that a vav in front of the pronoun can be understood to hipuchaize the verb, right? that there might be something else going on, but I'm not aware that if you have, right? It's interesting because since the ani is extraneous, it's a really interesting question, right? Yadati already means I knew. Therefore, had the ani not been there and it would have just been v'yadati, then it actually would have been v'vayipuch. So if the ani is like shoved in there as an unnecessary extraneous word, then possibly, and I wonder if that's informing either consciously or unconsciously Aryeh Kaplan's translation. But again, I think formally speaking, I think the answer would be no. But that doesn't mean that there's not something going on here. Formally speaking, it's only the vav in front of a verb itself, not the pronoun before a verb, that can invert the tense. Vered, I know there's so many hands up, which is wonderful because it's a great verse. But Vered, if I can put you on the spot, is there any way of reading the vav in front of va'ani as changing the tense of the verb yadati? Is she there?
Boker Tov. Not to my knowledge, but people who have commentaries are often playing with the verbs and the vowels. More so, I just want to say that in grammar world, if you say yadati or yadanu, if you use the first person single or plural, you actually don't need to say the pronoun itself. You don't need to say ani or anachnu. It's understood only for those two. So here we have not only ani yadati, which is extra ani, but the vav is a connecting vav. It has the vowels of a connecting vav, which is the same vowels for connecting, for saying vav from past to future. So whatever Mr. Kaplan wants to say, katonti, who am I to say something else?
Wonderful, Vered. I'll say one more thing, and then I'll get to the hands that are up. Even in modern Hebrew, Elon, and we've discussed this before, the slang has brought forward some of this fluidity of tense. And again, I don't think it's an intentional thing. I think it just happens, right? Where you're sitting at a table and you say to your friends, halachnu, which literally means we went. What it means in the moment is let's go. So the modern Hebrew form has held onto some of this interweaving use of tense in the Torah. It's probably the case that this verb just meant I know, and there's probably something that we can't fathom as to what is being imputed to this verse with the verb itself appearing in the past tense. I can't work it out, but you're right that it's a something, or it's probably.
Right. So I feel more comfortable with that interpretation, which is it's there, we don't know why, and I had a second part of the verse that I was questioning, which is below biyad chazaka, right? It's and the issue is kind of the same, which is sometimes I think we as Jews are too comfortable saying, well, that doesn't make sense, therefore it must be this. And I grapple with that. It's not something that I'm not necessarily, I shouldn't say I'm not necessarily comfortable. I am not comfortable with the fact that we say that, and I use that as a royal we far too often, right? Well, it's not comfortable for me, therefore it must not be that. Well, maybe it is that. And just, the fact that it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense.
Right. Great. And there's something lyrical about the fact that you're making that comment on the words of yadati, which is God expressing specific knowledge about something. Sometimes we actually have to look at that and say it might not make sense, and we're not going to figure it out.
Right, or even like I said, even with the mighty hand, it's the same thing. You're right. In the way it reads, it doesn't make sense. So, but we say, like, I'm okay with the fact that it doesn't make sense. I guess is.
Yeah, and the midrashic enterprise, as we've said 100 times in 150 different ways, is being super OCD sensitive to minor things in the verse that don't make sense, but then using that to open up to a world of possibility, to different layers and contours, and like an Escher painting of possibilities. We've used the Mary Poppins imagery before of Bert and Mary jumping into a two-dimensional painting. And then all of a sudden they're winning the derby, right? And on a fox hunt. That's the midrashic enterprise, but you can only do that if you're sensitive to a tiny, tiny thing not making perfect sense, right? Okay, so many hands up. I have no idea what the order they were, so I'm just going to do it on the screen. Rick, you're next.
Thank you. I think I was next after Alon. All right, so after all that about being super sensitive about teeny little things, trope. The first two words, it's a munach saket katon. And the first time we have that in the Torah is lo yadati, with Cain not knowing that Abel was his brother, that he was responsible for his brother. Okay?
Hold on, that's the first munach katon that has lo
yadati, that has the word yadati.
But it's not the first munach katon of the Torah.
No, sorry. But
yeah, more amazing. But I'm believing that.
No, it's not. It's just the first time you see lo yadati in the Torah, it's a munach. Okay. The second time is Avimelech. He says the same thing with the same trope. I didn't know that the men were stopping up the wells. Hamana. I didn't know that. So in my mind, both of those are linked in that. What did they know? What did they really not know? And Cain knew it was his brother, and Avimelech knew what was going on with the wells. So that brings us to here. What did God know, and what did God not know? Why is he doing this plan if it's not going to work, or it's going to work exactly like this? So I don't know what the layers are there, but I just thought I'd raise that.
And what does it even mean to apply the root yada, which we translate into the English know, and we know when we translate that whatever yada means, it doesn't work perfectly as the English word K-N-O-W. What does it mean to say that God knows or doesn't know something? Right? We've discussed it before. If God knows, does that mean God once didn't know and now God knew? Did God learn it? And Onkelos is playing with that a little bit. If you look at Onkelos's translation here, and then we'll get to Tova and then Rebecca. Onkelos translates it not as the Aramaic for the word no, but ukedamai gilei. It has been revealed in my presence, been revealed before me. So somehow Onkelos wants to say that the concept of knowledge to God is different than our concept of knowledge, but it's a revelation before God. But even that is weird, because isn't God is the revealer, not the one to whom something is revealed. So if it is revealed before God, does that mean it was once not revealed before God, then all of a sudden God had a revelation? So even the knowledge of knowledge in this verse is hard to make sense of. Not to mention the tense of it. Tova, and then Rebecca, and then we'll go down the list.
Okay, on 2 points. On the first one on Yadati, I'm somehow finding it less clashing, because for me, that's this statement that God is making seeks from the pronouncement he made earlier that you will go down into Egypt. Uh-huh. And so it comes from that. God knew then, and the Ani is like, and I surely knew that you would not come out, easily. It's just part of that foreknowing. So that's the way that I read it. For the last part, the velo biyad hazakah, I have more of a question than a comment. Larry translated it as without a strong hand. Silberman translates it not even by a strong hand. And I find that difference really fascinating, because with Larry's translation, it will require all of these things that we know are coming. Silberman suggests, yes, those things will happen, but even something beyond that's going to be required.
I'm so glad you surfaced that, Tova, both those comments. First of all, the first thing you said, that's a wonderful rescuing of the past tenseness of Yadati. I'm really moved by that. Everett Fox also adds in that even in parentheses. And here again, this is translation as commentary par excellence. There's no way to translate this without offering your interpretation as to what it means. Right? So he says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not give you leave to go. He's being precise but inelegant, right? Give you leave, because that's the yitain lahaloch, not, parentheses, even under a strong hand. And there's so much going on there in terms of our diving into what God did and did not know about how the plagues were going to happen. And these are important theological conversations, right? Important theological conversations about, did God know how much suffering from the very beginning was going to have to be rained down on the Egyptians to achieve this exodus? Do we want to know whether or not God knew all that? Right? And that's all built into this word no, and the strong-handedness that's going to be required. Thank you, Tova. Beautiful comments. Rebecca.
I actually wanted to make 2 comments on the exact same 2 points. One about the Yadati. I think that often in modern Hebrew, but also in English, when we use the past tense, we're about something that is currently happening, we're actually describing a state of mind, like saying, Ratziti lagid. So I wanted to say, which is not something that I wanted necessarily to do in the past, but it's sort of describing a state of mind. And so I would interpret the Yadati in this case as I own the knowledge that. And then about the below, my first reading of it would be, as it is read.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That the strong arm will not be enough to let you out. It took not 9 plagues, but 10. So I think it's sort of consistent with actually what does happen. It takes even more than just a strong arm or a strong hand to get Pharaoh to do the will of God.
Yeah, there's a horrific foreshadowing about the amount of God's strong hand that's going to be required to achieve this liberation, and it may even be that the the lack of certainty as to what to do with Bi'ada Chazakah is related to a discomfort with how much of that was foreknown and preordained. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, Joanna, Barbara, Barry, Larry, Diane.
Two things. One, I'm not 100% sure I'm remembering grammar correctly, and welcome anyone to correct me. But I think va'ani is always va'ani because in the word ani, it really should be a shva, but because an aleph can't take a shva, it takes the combo vowel of patach plus shva. And the grammar still treats it like a shva. So a vav can never have a shva when it precedes, when the next letter also has a shva. So the word is always va'ani in every context, and it's nothing unusual about having va'ani here. And as we were talking about the past tense, I looked up the verse on Sefaria to see if anybody spoke to that. And I think Chizkuni does.
A little bit. Yes, I saw that too. He dances with it a little bit. What, you want to read that out loud?
Sure. Sorry, 1 second. Give me 1 second to get back to it.
I can also bring that up onto the screen. Hold on a second. I was debating whether some of us who have that Torah Chaim Chumash have it in front of us, but since not everyone does, let me quickly bring it up. This is verse 18 or 19? This is verse 19.
19, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to bring this up onto the screen, and you can kind of walk us through it. All right. Everyone see that? Go ahead.
So he starts just by quoting our verse and then says, God revealed to Moses beforehand. And I think that beforehand is the whole clue to it. Because to me, what Chizkuni is getting at here is take yourself, the present tense moment is standing in front of Pharaoh. So if that's the present tense, in the past, beforehand, God already knew this.
Yeah, in fact, this English translation of Chizkuni's quoting of the verse before the translation of Chizkuni's commentary itself, I know that's confusing, is translating Chizkuni's quoting of the verse with the word already. I know already. And I think that's playing with what I think it was Tova was saying before, that it's and Rebecca, like I'm bringing to this moment that I already knew this was happening. I already knew. Great. Okay. Joanna, was there another comment as well?
No, that's it.
I don't remember who was next.
Barbara.
Barbara, go ahead, Barbara. And then Barry, and then Larry.
I just wanted to read the Sefaria translation of the verse because I like it really a lot.
Okay.
Yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. I like that only in there. And he says might instead of hand. No big difference, but only because of that. And that's not in our translation that we've had already.
Yeah. So the use of the word only in the phrase is really significant. I remember it took me, weeks of yeshiva to understand that in Hebrew, a lo, ... and then an ella should not be translated as no, rather, but she should be translated as only. That only, our use of the word only sometimes takes two words in Hebrew separated by other words. And so there's a miniature version of it going on here that the lo yitain, he will not permit you. You have to, you can't translate that will not permit you until you actually get to the end of the sentence. And that second velo is kind of doing a except for, which means if no except for means only. We'll only do it under these circumstances. Now, as we saw, that's not the only way of actually reading the simple meaning of that verse, but that is the most common way of understanding what those two lows are doing to each other. Barry, and then Larry, Diane, and then we'll get to Rashi.
So, I'm looking at the Aniyadati, and I'm hit with the simultaneity of God's existence. God exists before this existence that we know. And in that pre-existence, Yadati, it's pre-known. This is all known. But the Ani, God is now in the current situation. God's self is in here speaking to Moshe at the burning bush. And I know that it's in my pre-knowledge. This is so. It's very uncomfortable to say this in English because it contravenes anything that is comfortable for us.
Correct. And you've alerted us to that in the past, Barry, that our human attempt to make sense of God with words and language and applying the concept of tense to God is in itself a ridiculousness, right? And the best we can do is the Adon Olam, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hoveh, V'hu Yeh. And if you are a being who is Haya, Hoveh, and Yeh, which is not like us, what does a past tense verb even mean to you with respect to you? While Larry and Dan are making a comment, I'm going to move my computer because I'm running out of juice and I don't have a plug with me. So I'm sorry for the distraction, but Larry, Dan, go ahead.
So I want to talk about the end of the verse, V'lo biyad chazakah. Aryeh Kaplan has a very interesting translation, which is, unless he is forced to do so. And then there's a note, and he's got a variety of translations of that phrase. So he says, Ralbag, the Septuagint, literally, and not with a strong hand. Alternatively, and not even by threat of force. Rashbam and Hirsch,
That's right.
Even after a show of force.
That's
Hizkunis and Sforno, but not because of his strength, Rashi and Rashbam, even after my miracles are Barbanel, and most emphatically so, and most emphatically so. So a whole variety of ways of thinking about those last words.
Yeah, can anyone, before we actually look at the Rashi, make sense of the verse? I don't even know how to say the sentence in English. If it just means what it looks like it means, if it just meant, and I know that God will not permit you to go, and not with a strong hand, can anyone make sense of that? If it doesn't mean only with, and if it doesn't mean even with, it just means and not with, is there anyone who can convert that into meaning that is meaningful?
So I think Aryeh Kaplan's, unless he's forced to do so by some power that's not force.
I think there's a simpler explanation.
Okay.
I don't think this is the explanation, but the simple explanation would be, and Pharaoh's playing with a weak hand. In other words, imagine an analogy that you say to someone, try to get this guy to do this, and he's not going to do it, but he's got a weak hand. So you can push him and you can get him to do it.
So the biyada chazakah modifying Pharaoh and not God.
Exactly.
Right. So Rashi's going to get close to that.
A little more simple is that there's only one strong hand in this story.
Yeah. So it's not Pharaoh. Yeah. Okay. So with that as a setup, we've done a lot of wonderful pre-surgery on this verse. Now let's actually read Rashi, which again, he's not the only person to comment on the verse, but this is primarily a Rashi thing that we're investigating. So first, Larry, the first Rashi, Lo Yitein Etchem.
Right. Let me just get back to the first Rashi. Okay. So the first Rashi, Lo Yitein Etchem, Melech Mitzrayim Lahaloch. Im ein ani mare lo yadi hachazaka. Klomar, kol od she'en ani modio yadi hachazaka lo yitein etchem laoloch.
Now, before you start translating, Larry, I'll just give you the tiny hint that sometimes the Rashi's comment begins after the quotation of the verse, and sometimes, and this is the case, in order to understand Rashi, he actually wants you to read through, like to his words are actually a continuation of the verse. So he wants you to read through to help understand the verse. So start translating from Lo Yitein Etchem and then keep reading through.
Okay. He won't give you the king of Egypt won't allow you to go, won't give you leave to go, if I don't show him my strong hand. Okay. So you can't get out of here unless I show him my strong hand, which is to say, as long as I don't, if I don't announce my strong hand, right? I don't. So he's using, instead of mareh, he's saying he's using modia. If I don't demonstrate, announce my strong hand, he won't give you to go. It seems to me just to be almost redundant here.
Yeah.
I don't see the difference between the two parts of Rashi. The three parts of the phrase are: Pharaoh won't allow you to go if I don't show him my strong hand. And then Rashi's continuing, which is to say, as long as, that's the difference. Kol od.
It is a little bit the Department of Redundancy department. I think what Rashi might say is, first thing I'm going to do is actually quote the verse and continue the verse the way I think it should sound and mean, and then I'm going to paraphrase the whole thing again, right? So,
right. Okay.
Right. So, and I like how you translated it. You created an unless here, right? And unless, these words are fascinating words, right? We know how to use them, but it's interesting to break them down. The im ein ani literally means if I don't show him, but what that means is unless I show him, right? Because you can have the same meaning with a negative or with something that's not a negative, which is like an unless, even though unless has some negative built into it. And notice that even though the part of the verse that Rashi is quoting, and I'm going to put that in quotation marks because I remind us that we're not 100% sure that the words that we have here as the diburei hamatchil, the quoted words from the verse, we're not 100% sure that Rashi included those initially in his comments, so he might have just been commenting on the verse itself. But let's say he did include them. He's actually not quoting the words from the verse that he's mostly commenting on, which is the velo biad chazakah, because he quotes the part of the verse that he thinks makes sense, and then he fills in what he thinks is like a better way or a clear way of saying it. God will not permit, the king of Egypt will not permit you to go unless I show God my strong hand, which is to say, as long as I don't show him. Notice I think it's a bit of a wink that when Rashi moves from mar'eh to modio, he's playing with yada. Unless I make known, I, God, who know this, unless I make known to Pharaoh my strong hand, there's no way you're going to get out of here. So Rashi is doubling down on the idea that the best way to translate this is in a unless or an only in the following situation, which is to say, I know from the very beginning that my strong hand is going to be required. I'll add to that. I know from the very beginning that there's going to be suffering on their side. I know from the very beginning that he's going to harden his heart, or I'm going to be a part of hardening his heart, and I'm still doing it. Right? So Moshe is God is revealing to Moshe for the first moment at the burning bush, I already know, Moshe, that I'm sending you into a situation that's going to force you to represent my strong hand in wounding and damaging them as a way of extracting my people from Egypt. So there's actually a lot built in to reading the lo biad chazakah that way. And as we'll see in a second, it's not the only way even Rashi reads it. Pause. Any other comments on that part of it?
Can I just make a very simple comment, which is it's almost as if God is saying, you'll still need me. Don't think I've given you all the information and now you can go back, get the elders, tell Pharaoh to go, and off you go. You need my strong hand. You can't do it yourself.
Yeah. Good. Joel?
I mean, you can actually read it two different ways. One is, I'm sending you even though I know he's not going to let you go unless I, do my stuff.
or the reason I'm sending you is because I know he's never going to let you go unless we do it this way.
Good. I've used this term before, a havamina, like a what I might have thought, that is sometimes has to be raised and then rejected in an argument like this. So there is a super commentary on Rashi that tries to explain why it's so important for Rashi to not have you think that what the phrase means is he's not going to let you go even with a strong hand, right? It doesn't mean that. And why does it not mean that? Because we have at least two other places going forward where we're going to actually see that it is indeed ki biyada chazaka yishalchem. In chapter 6, verse 1, God is going to say, it's more clear. It's with my strong hand that Pharaoh will send you forward. And later on, when there is a looking back on Exodus night in chapter 13 of Shemot, Ki biyada chazaka hotziacha Adonai mimitzrayim. It was with a strong hand that God took you out of Egypt. You know that line from the Haggadah. So since the Torah later on makes reference to the fact that it is specifically through God's strong hand that Exodus happens, then, reader, don't read this verse as saying he will not let you go even with a strong hand, which is what the lo biyada chazaka could mean. It just doesn't mean that here, according to the first interpretation of Rashi. Okay. Now, Rashi's going to go on a slight tangent on the verb lo yitain, and then he's going to come back later on, which we may or may not get to this class, for another way of reading the biyada chazaka. So let's read the tangent. But before we read the tangent, Larry, everyone look at the Onkelos again. We looked at it briefly on va'ani yadati, which Onkelos translates as ukdamai gelei. It's revealed before me. Are, that la yishbok. La is low. Onkelos translates yitain from the root natan into the Aramaic yishbok, shin bet kuf. I'm going to pull up what that word means for those of you who don't know it. Hold on 1 second. I have it out.
So glad.
We heard you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So this is the Jastro on the root shin bet kuf, which I'm sure there are poetic places in Hebrew where this root retains its ancient meaning, but in ancient Aramaic, it's a different root than in Hebrew. So shin bet kuf is to leave, to let go, to forsake, to abandon, to leave behind, to bequeath. Right? If you go down to the second translation here, to remit, to pardon, forgive. Guess what is not in any of these translations? To give, right? So whatever shabak means, it's not the same as our basic understanding of what notain means. It means to permit, to let go. So when Onkelos translates it as la yishbok yadchon, it's not that the king of Egypt will not give you, but not allow, permit, let go. Okay, so Rashi's going to quote that and then expand that out. So now you can read, Larry. Okay, so Rashi. Well, somebody says kitargumo, like is in the Targum, lo yishbok kemo. So he's quoting the Targum, and then it says kemo. And now we've got a quote from Bereshit, chapter 20, verse 6. Al kain lo nataticha. And I didn't look it up yet. I asked, you got it? There. Okay. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so this is Avimelech, I believe. And one of the many such times where either Abraham or Isaac finds himself either in Gerar or in Egypt, and there's some potential capturing of either Sarah or Rebecca, and then a saving of Sarah Rebecca, and then God doing something to punish the king for having, captured her. And now this is God saying to Avimelech in the dream, Vayomer elav Elohim b'chalom, God said to him in a dream, Gam anochi yadati, interesting, I have known. Kiv betom lebabcha asita zot. It was with a pure heart you did this. I mean, not that pure. Pure in the sense that you didn't know that she was married. Not pure in the sense that you didn't take her. You did take her, but you didn't know she was married. Va'echsoch gam anochi otcha mechatoli. And I spare you from the notion of your having sinned against me. Al kain, therefore, lo nitaticha lingoa eleha. Same translation problem. We can't really translate it as, therefore, I have not given you, because certainly not given as a transitive verb, but I have not let you. Here it's translated here as let you. So here the lo nitaticha is more clearly rendered as a permit as opposed to a give, and so Rashi uses as a proof text to support Onkelos' translating as yitain savak. Keep reading.
V'lo natnu Elohim lahara amadi, which is from Shemot, and are you going to show that one as well?
I am. I had it up and it closed down. So hold on one second. What's the exact citation? 13:9, right?
No, is it? It's
31.
Lamed Aleph. So 31.
31, Rabbi.
31.
31.
Verse 8.
31:8.
31:8.
It's Breshit 31.
Breshit, right? Okay.
Oh, it's a mistake.
7.
Here it says Shemot here. Yeah. It's in the translation, Joel. I see what you're looking at. The translation says it's 31, but the Rashi itself in the Torah Chaim says Shemot Lamed Aleph Chet.
I don't know why I'm having such a hard time finding it. Here, 31:7. Okay, here we go.
31:7.
Okay, so here we go. Chapter 31 of Bereshit. This is Yaakov talking to Rachel and Leah about Lavan, and he says to them as the fleeing happens, "Va'avichen hetel bi, your father has cheated me. Vehechlif et maskorti, and kept changing my payment, aseret monim, 10 different times. Velo nitano Elohim lahara imedi. God did not blank to do evil to me. Permit, let, right? And so once again here, it's just, there's no way you could translate it as give. So it's being translated, therefore it can be used as a proof text. Right?
Could we say give leave? Did not give leave?
Yeah, you could. And this is where, as English has developed, even the word give has changed. There are certainly more archaic uses of the English give that permit an understanding of the word permission. Correct. Okay, keep going, Larry.
Okay. So I guess I'm at V'chulan lashon netina hem, and they're all of the language of netina hem.
Right. So what I think Rashi is saying with those words are these two proof texts that I share with you, which you know, reader, what they mean, and they don't mean give, but they're using the verb netina to suggest something like a giving of permission, right? So even though they use netina, they use that root, it's not hard to figure out in those contexts what the words mean. Therefore, import that into our verse. Onkelos was right. You can translate natan as shavak, which means to give leave, to permit, to let happen.
But don't we do this all the time in modern Hebrew? Ten li latzet, let me go.
We do, and this is probably why, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you might ask yourself, so why does Rashi have to even go there? Isn't it obvious that the root yitain means that? Right. Sometimes Rashi answers a question that wasn't a huge problem because a common user of Hebrew knows that. But it is different, right? Because latate, the standard way of understanding the verb latate, which even in the imperative, the infinitive is a weird form because you don't have either nun of notain in the infinitive latate. So that's kind complicated, although the biblical infinitive is litain. It can either be a transitive verb that has a direct object to give something, or here to permit something to happen. And Rashi wants to make sure we understand it that way. Not that we would have been that confused. Okay, we're at 9:29. Let's hold it here because the next thing that Rashi does is give an entirely different reading of the velo biad chazaka that he gave once, but it jives with some of the other things that we already said, right? Because we played around with lots of possibilities of velo biad chazaka before we even read Rashi on it. So let's call it so that we don't have to rush through that, and we'll pick up on the second part of that Rashi next week.
Can I just add something for a second?
Please.
Larry was saying that it was in Shemot, but the word isn't Shemot. It's actually Sham, Ibid. So it says Sham, Labid, Olive, Ched. So the last quotation was from Bereshit. So is this one. It's Ibid.
Correct. That reminds me of, right, the whole Magdil Migdol situation, that we think that the reason why to this day we say, sometimes even forget which one, Magdil, weekday, Migdol, and Shabbat, because there was a notation in some book a long time ago that said Shin Bet, and someone thought that was a reference to Shabbat, but it's actually a reference to Shmuel Bet, the second book of Shmuel, which is where that word comes from in a Haftarah that we read actually a few weeks ago. So, yeah, sometimes those two letters put us in the wrong direction.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.